Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, we'll learn what's being done locally to help people recover after gun violence.
We have to remember that, patients can have long-term disabilities, whether it's physical or mental, and we have to be responsible for ensuring that our patients recover to the best of their ability.
We'll look ahead to this weekend's Doors Open and share how the event has grown over the last 15 years. Plus, learn why leaves change color in the fall.
As the plants sense that the days are getting shorter and the temperature is going down, particularly at night when we get kind of little chills, the plants start getting ready for winter.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thank you so much for joining us today. Milwaukee continues to seek solutions to gun violence in the community. Colleen Trevino is a nurse practitioner at Froedtert and the Medical College and the director of the Trauma Quality of Life Clinic. She's treated trauma patients for over 20 years, many of them for firearm injuries. The clinic takes a holistic approach to treating those affected by gun violence. Trevino joins me now to talk about the work being done at the clinic. Can you share what typically happens to people who have experienced a firearm injury from violence or anything like that comes through your doors in the healthcare setting?
Yeah, so kind of how it all works is patients are either dropped off or come in via ambulance. They're seen in the trauma bay. All of the trauma team is alerted. In the trauma team, we have a trauma surgeon. We have various levels of surgical residents. We have nurse practitioners and physician assistants. We have trauma specialty nurses. And we have the emergency department group, which is an emergency department physician residents, and then the nurses. And so once we have a trauma activation, everybody comes to the bed. And we do a primary, secondary survey, which is look at the patient, look for their injuries, and then come up with a quick plan on how to evaluate those injuries, whether it's a CT scan or go to the operating room. Sometimes people will get some procedures in the trauma bay, like a chest tube. And sometimes we will do bedside operations if it's an emergency. Once they go to either the OR, then they might go to the ICU or the inpatient unit. If they're sick enough, they'll go to the ICU. ICU is a trauma specialty unit. So our nurses and advanced practice providers will care for the patients while they're in the ICU. Then they can be transferred to our trauma unit. So we have a specialty trauma unit, which also has a step-down component for a little bit sicker patients with specialty trauma nurses that care for them as they recover after their injuries.
So a bunch of support and resources are activated quickly, but for after the patient is treated and they're deemed healthy enough to go home, is there much support or a system that they can lean back on?
So the other thing that we are really fortunate in having is we have a trauma psychology program here. So we screen everybody for depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, the risk of. And if they screen high, they are actually seen by our trauma psychologists while they're inpatient. Once they go home, we send them home with all the directions on how to care for their wounds and how to take their medicines. But as you can imagine, it's extremely overwhelming. Also, not necessarily having a lot of additional resources when they go home, and us as hospital providers not knowing what all of those additional resources are. And I think the big change in our system really was the addition of our hospital-based violence interrupter program, which is Form for Life. Really, their focus is to prevent the cycle of violence. and prevent any additional violence because of the injury. And what they also do for us is provide a credible messenger. And so they are really able to connect us with our patients and provide a bridge of trust to let our patients really know that we do care and we do want to help them get better, and we want to protect them as well, so they don't get re-injured. The other two pieces are community pieces. So we have violence interrupters in the community that can go to the neighborhoods and prevent that cycle of violence. And then we also have an outreach group that can help with resources as well. So that really changed our ability to connect with our patients. And then at the same time, we really wanted to develop this multidisciplinary follow-up clinic, which we started in November of 2020. So we put it together so that we would have all the pieces to ensure that we were addressing all the biopsychosocial needs of our patients. So there's me as the nurse practitioner who manages their wounds and their pain. Then they see our trauma psychologists, so that whether they saw them in the hospital and or had anything set up outpatient, it's always a check-in. They will see our trauma social worker to determine if there's any additional resources they need, such as issues with housing, issues with getting food. Then they will also follow up with our physical therapist, so we can ensure that they're progressing like they need to physically. And then, of course, they'll follow up with our 414 Life hospital-based violence interrupter, once again as a check-in, and then also to determine if they need to hand them off to the community group as well. Then we developed a nurse navigator program, and they would be that connection and that person that they know, so that when they go home, if they have any questions, they know somebody and they know that person that they can contact. And I think that has, once again, really helped bridge that gap between discharge and going home. And this is the only program in the nation like it.
So with the Trauma Quality of Life Clinic, when did you make the transition from treating trauma patients to then studying it as it continues to impact patients, right? Because from what I understand, with your research overall at this clinic, you're working on quantifying trauma and inequity to then mitigate disparities in the future, right?
Yeah, I mean, we do know that our patients who are injured by firearm and violence do have worse chronic pain, more depression, more post-traumatic stress disorder, or long-term quality of life outcomes. And so we have verified that indeed they are at higher risk. And then also we're looking at currently collecting that data longitudinally so that once again, we can verify that this patient population is at extreme risk for these poor quality of life outcomes. And that's the research that we continue to do.
What are some of the challenges of research that assesses individuals who are recently traumatized?
Well, I'll tell you, I think we get really good responses from our patients. They want to help out. They want to participate. They want to, help document some of the issues that are going on with this patient population, which is typically the majority are young Black men. 80% are young Black men, and they want to help us identify their patient population and what interventions really can work for them in order to heal over time. So we don't get a whole lot of concerns from the patient's perspective about participating in research. And I think, once again, developing the trust in the beginning mitigates a lot of that mistrust with research as well.
Taking a healing approach to trauma, having this approach as a public health priority, is this a relatively new concept in the medical and humanities fields?
It isn't. However, I will tell you it is new in trauma care. In the past, it is about saving a life and mortality and the trauma bay. But, when we save a life, we have to remember that, patients can have long-term disabilities, whether it's physical or mental, and we have to be responsible for ensuring that our patients recover to the best of their ability, and we have to support that. And I think we can take lessons learned from cancer care and neurosurgery and neurology care, that it's not a new idea. It's just applying it to the disease of trauma, which is what we need to, once again, refocus our thoughts about. It's not just about this injury or this gunshot wound to the chest or this broken arm. It's about everything that goes along with the experience. And so it definitely needs to be refocused into a public health model.
Would you say that's often the part that's left out of the greater conversation when it comes to the wider impact of gun violence?
Yeah, absolutely. In it, once again, the social determinants of health really are affected. And when you think about one injury, it's not just an impact of that body part. It is an impact of their ability to go back to work, their ability to take care of their family, their ability to participate in their community. And so once again, we have to think broader and think about how we can get humans back to as close to baseline as possible.
So can you share some of the strategies that you and the team have developed in order to improve the well-being and recovery of the individuals who have experienced firearm injuries that come through the clinic?
It is about setting a culture of mutual respect, of showing that we do care, and we ask all the questions now. I'll tell you, 20 years ago, I didn't ask questions about, are you, having nightmares? Are you coming out of your house? Are you feeling safe? Because I couldn't address any of those issues. Now we address all those issues and we ask all the questions. And so I think just treating people as humans and then letting them understand that they can ask us anything and we will try to work to resolve some of those problems the best as we can.
I imagine there's more work to be done for many other places, Milwaukee and beyond, to see trauma as a public health priority. But in your opinion, with the work you've done and the experiences you've had, what's the first step to help other medical professionals and organizations to start thinking in this lens?
We're out on the road all the time. We do a lot of presentations at our professional organizations, our trauma organizations, and I think everybody is really drinking the Kool-Aid, but the concern they have is, how do you get something like this started? And you just have to be real persistent. You have to have, I hate to say it, you have to have the right people, because if you don't have those people who are willing to push and do the work and talk to all the players who can actually make it happen, you just won't get anywhere. And you have to focus on what you can do and then just incrementally add to it.
Yeah, just one factor of a ton of important work that you're doing. So Colleen, thank you so much for joining me today to talk a little more about it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Colleen Trevino is a nurse practitioner, an associate professor of surgery at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and the director of the Trauma Quality of Life Clinic. We spoke last summer. We've got a new season of Bubbler Talk on the way, so that means we need to hear from you. Submit your questions about what you've always wanted to know about the Milwaukee area at wuwm.com. Did you know that Chicago was almost a part of Wisconsin? Well, we'll share more about that in about 20 minutes. But first, we'll learn about Doors Open Milwaukee, how it got started here, and what people can enjoy during this special event. Keep listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. This weekend marks the 15th anniversary of Doors Open Milwaukee. The annual event takes place every September, with dozens of buildings citywide opening their doors to visitors. It's a chance to see parts of the city that are usually hidden from the public. For many, the annual event has become a weekend-long extravaganza filled with revealed secrets, childlike wonder, and curious engagement. Lake Effect's Sam Woods dives into how the event got started and what keeps it fresh every year.
Let's take it back 15 years. Phones were becoming smart, the economy was greatly recessing, and TikTok was a Kesha song. And around that time, George Wagner, who would go on to found Doors Open Milwaukee, was flipping through books in Toronto.
I was looking through a book that was actually written by a former mayor of Toronto, in which he was describing Doors Open Toronto. And that's what kind of got me hooked into thinking, I wonder, could we do that here in Milwaukee?
But while Wagner says Toronto was the first city to bring an event like Doors Open to North America, they weren't the last. Soon, he was on a trip to Denver to check out their rendition of Doors Open.
I was still working. I was a librarian at the Central Library in Milwaukee. Went on a Saturday morning, came back on a Sunday night, and went to many different sites that Doors Open Denver had. The thing that impressed me the most was the smiles on people's faces as they were walking around downtown Denver, having just gone into or getting ready to go to another site. And Denver has some really excellent buildings. However, I knew enough about Milwaukee to know that we actually had more.
Wagner had done tours with Historic Milwaukee before, so he pitched the idea to them. And Historic Milwaukee, as a nonprofit with a mission to build awareness of Milwaukee's architecture and history, the project was an easy sell. The first Doors Open Milwaukee would be held in 2011. To drum up enthusiasm, Wagner said he first focused on recruiting the big fish downtown to participate. Soon, he convinced the library, City Hall, and the U.S. Bank building to participate. The results proved the concept.
We figured we had something in the order of 10,000 people that went through our sites that first year, and that probably exceeded our expectations.
But from the beginning, Wagner wanted Doors Open Milwaukee to be more than the big-ticket buildings or the sheer number of people visiting. He wanted it to be a way for people to reconnect with the city.
You know, a lot of people in the Milwaukee area grew up in the city of Milwaukee, and then they moved out to further suburbs. And so one of the ideas was to kind of say, come back home to Milwaukee. You know, don't just come here to a Bucks game and then maybe a restaurant. You're passing up all sorts of things. You know, there are buildings that are very interesting and people doing lots of different things in small manufacturers or large ones or large buildings that you don't get a chance to go behind the scenes and see these things and how they actually operate. And so that was kind of an incentive to try to get a lot of former Milwaukeeans who didn't really come back to the center of town anymore, or only for, you know, maybe they'll go to Summerfest, but then they leave right away. And to get them to come back to appreciate the great bones that we had in this city.
I'm Kim Cunningham. I am a Doors Open Milwaukee superfan and a Historic Milwaukee volunteer.
Kim Cunningham has been coming to Doors Open since 2017. Now, Doors Open is a 2-day event, Saturday and Sunday, with some locations open the whole time, others only 1 day. Some visitors pick 1 or 2 locations a year in between other weekend activities. But from the beginning, Cunningham has chosen to make a whole weekend of it.
That first year, I visited 15 different buildings, and I was, I was hooked.
Cunningham says she's kept up a similar pace every year, visiting 15 to 20 sites while also finding time to volunteer with Doors Open. She says she loves meeting the owners of various buildings, talking art with art gallery directors, or talking plants with established gardeners. For her volunteer shift, she manages other volunteers at sites in between her own visits. So on Doors Open weekend, everyone knows her calendar is booked.
My family and friends know that, that the third weekend in September, I am not available.
Cunningham is also a huge fan of Chicago's version of Doors Open, and it turns out Milwaukee has fans from down south as well.
I've been around people who I've met in Chicago during their event who come here, and it's like, oh, I remember you. And yeah, so it's always like a interesting how far the reach is for the event and how many people from different areas it attracts.
Wagner would not be surprised to hear this. He remembers volunteers from the early days coming in from far and wide and going above and beyond.
We had a guy who came down from Toronto who had been involved in the Toronto Doors Open. And he had a van, and in his van, he made out badges and with lanyards. And he made them out for all our volunteers. He came back a couple of years more after that. I mean, it was just like, who does that? Didn't charge us for anything, did the whole thing. And so, I mean, it took a lot of people like that who went over and above, and not just people from town who helped us be a success.
But for Cunningham, the access to buildings and the people she meets are not the only draw. The weekend event also keeps a lifelong passion of hers alive.
I've been doing photography since I was about 11 years old. First camera my parents ever gave me was a Vivitar 110. I've taken photography classes all through, high school, and my BFA is in photography from UW Milwaukee. And Doors Open Milwaukee gives me a chance to be able to, not only combine my love of architecture, but combine my love of photography as well.
And she loves a hidden gem.
I am a sucker for different ornamental elements that are inside buildings or outside buildings. Sometimes I'll get people see me getting on the floor and taking photographs of tile or close stuff, sort of like door handles or like door hinges.
And like Wagner, Cunningham sees Doors Open as a prime opportunity to let Milwaukeeans feel like insiders, but also for people outside the city to remember why people love living here.
People from other cities or other parts of the state may think, oh, it's a bad city, it's crime-ridden. And I think Doors Open Milwaukee can help me take photographs of these old beautiful buildings and show people that we're not just what the headlines portray us to be. We still have beautiful buildings, beautiful people, and basically beauty in some places where people may not expect it.
I'm Ashley Town. I am the owner of Bayview Printing Company, and we are a 110-year-old letterpress printing shop in Bayview.
And Ashley Town knows beauty. She came to Milwaukee as an art student, eventually taking over the Bayview print shop. Printing was not something she studied or something she originally sought out. Before owning the print shop, she was a graphic designer, and she appreciated beauty in the printed form, but was looking for something more manual, something to do with her hands. And when she first walked into the print shop to visit, it was a timeless kind of beauty.
So letterpress is the original form of printmaking. So we have a huge collection of wood and lead type, and then antique printing presses, and that's how we produce everything that we make. I mean, if you ever come to the shop, you can feel it. Like you walk into the basement and you feel like you've walked into a different era. Like everything down there is anywhere from 80 to 150 years old. It smells like a print shop. It smells like paper and ink and history and cabinetry and metal and all of those things. And so no, printing was not a hobby of mine, but I immediately fell in love with it when I found the shop.
She soon took over as owner of the shop and got to work making a business out of it. But it wasn't always easy attracting people to the shop. About 10 years ago, Historic Milwaukee reached out to her to see if her business would like to participate in Doors Open. Town had been to Doors Open as a visitor and was a fan of the event's advertising art style. But her reasons for saying yes to hosting were also practical.
So from the business side of things, we were kind of like, it would be cool if people knew who we were.
And if you open your doors, they will come.
Yeah, I kind of thought, oh, maybe we'll give tours to 100 people. Wouldn't that be amazing if 100 people came through the doors this weekend? And we were open all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and we gave tours to 1,600 people. It was absolutely wild. The shop was completely full for 8 hours, 2 days in a row. My son was like 6 or 7 months old. Yeah, 6 months old. And so my husband would bring him over in between tours, and I would like stand in a corner and breastfeed and then give the baby back to my husband and give another tour. It was just like constant. That's small business life.
Like Wagner wanting Doors Open to be an opportunity for suburbanites to spend time in the city, the sheer number of people is one thing, but the softer metrics matter too. Though Town had been so entranced initially by the print shop, when she bought the place and started running it, it slowly became a business. The day-to-day chiseled away at her initial wonder, and walking into the shop for the 1,000th time just didn't hit the same as the first time. But Doors Open gives her a chance to travel back in time to when she first discovered her business.
I mean, we always walk away from this weekend like so fulfilled. It can be really easy to forget that what I have is so magical, like to own something that is literally a piece of history. But it's always really cool to have a bunch of people in the shop who have never been there before. There's always a kid that opens a drawer and picks up a piece of wood type, and it's like, to show a kid that you can like hold language in your hands, that and hold history in your hands, that's always really cool. Kids always like light up. I think it reminds us that what we have is important, and we should continue to like cultivate that education.
This year, Doors Open celebrates its 15th year. It's grown out of downtown to incorporate neighborhood tours to help visitors not just get familiar with Milwaukee's buildings, but to engage with its neighborhoods. Grace Four, events director at Historic Milwaukee, explains how ticketed tours are now folded into the weekend event.
This year we have about 40 ticketed tour sites, and some are building tour sites, so like the ability to go to the top of the City Hall bell tower or tour Jones Island. You need tickets for those, and those are free because they're at municipal sites. But then there's also some unique walking tours. So George leads a walking tour on the east side. That's great. We partner with the Wisconsin LGBT History Project to do a walking tour with them in the Walker's Point neighborhood, and there's dozens of others. So lots of great ticketed tour opportunities to kind of get more in depth.
But in accordance with Wagner's original vision, that Doors Open would be an opportunity for people to reevaluate preconceived notions of Milwaukee, Four says Historic Milwaukee is now finding ways to measure that softer impact.
We measure this now on a survey. We kind of ask people, did this event make you feel proud to be a Milwaukeean? And 90% of people who are Milwaukeeans say, yes, it did. We also ask if people visited a neighborhood they were previously unfamiliar with, and if they plan to visit the neighborhood again. And again, those are really high percentages of people who visited a neighborhood that maybe they had never been to before because of Doors Open, had a great experience and plan to go back there. So we hope that the program has a ripple effect beyond just the one weekend. And then also speaking to the who's taking the tour, and it's a really nice split of people who live in the city of Milwaukee, people who are visiting from our suburban neighbors and surrounding counties and other states, and more people from Illinois think that Milwaukee's very cool.
So next time you're at Doors Open, by all means, enjoy the buildings. You should absolutely enjoy the unique opportunity to get an inside peek at your favorite spots and meet someone new who shares your enthusiasm for architecture, for history, for neighborhoods, for whatever brings you out that weekend. All of that is what this weekend is for. But also, remember how George Wagner wanted to create something that coaxed people back into a city they grew up in. Or remember how Kim Cunningham documents stereotype-defying beauty in the mundane, whether it's of a courthouse carpet or a vaulted roof. Or remember how Ashley Town summons the technology of a bygone era to create an alphabet you can hold, and how she cannot wait to share that wonder with you. Remember what this weekend is all about, and keep your door open to beauty.
That piece was produced by Lake Effect Sam Woods. WUWM is one of the organizations taking part in Doors Open this Saturday. Join us at Chase Tower to learn about our work and see our studios and workspace. Fall is here, and leaves across Wisconsin are starting to turn hues of orange, yellow, and red. But you might be wondering, why do some leaves change color in the fall? To get to the bottom of our fall colors, Lake Effect's expert Nunez is joined by Erica Young, a professor of biological sciences at UW-Milwaukee.
I don't know about you, but fall is my favorite season, and that really has to do with the changing colors in the leaves. But before we get into why leaves change colors, can you help explain why leaves are green?
Yeah, I also love fall, although obviously the plants are doing their job over the whole of the summer and they need that green chlorophyll pigment to help them do that. So this helps them harvest light energy, which they convert into chemical energy, which they can then store and ultimately produce sugars, which they can use as food, but also can be stored in the plant and be a food for other organisms that might eat that plant. So that chlorophyll is about harvesting solar energy and basically driving everything on this planet. So chlorophyll's pretty important.
Yeah, that's a big role. So what happens to chlorophyll in the fall when the sun isn't out as long as it is in the summer?
So the chlorophyll is in the leaves during the summer, and there are other pigments in there as well. But as the plants sense that the days are getting shorter and the temperature is going down, particularly at night when we get kind of little chills, which is part of what makes fall really a lovely time as well, the plants start getting ready for winter. So one of the adaptations to coping and surviving in the winter that we have here is to not have the delicate parts, the leaves, on the plant during the winter. So during fall, when they're getting those signals of the shortening days and the cooler nights, they start activating processes to get ready for winter. And chlorophyll is a pigment that has nitrogen in it, which is an important resource for plants. It's often limiting. And so instead of just losing that chlorophyll when the leaves fall off the tree, they withdraw that chlorophyll slowly from the leaves and store that nutrients in the rest of the plant and in the roots during winter so that they can use it again in spring. And this involves breaking down the chlorophyll molecules and translocating those nutrients out of the leaf back into the plant. So at that point, the leaves stop being quite so green, but we can see the other pigments that were always there over the summer, but were often masked by that bright, strong green color of the chlorophyll. And so we see other pigments like carotenoids, which are the yellows and oranges. And some plants also start making other pigments called anthocyanins, which they make during the fall to protect their leaves during that process while they're, recovering nutrients. We call this fall senescence. And so these anthocyanins are more of the reds and purple colors that you can see in some of the plant species.
So in addition to chillier nights and shorter days, what other environmental conditions make leaves change color?
So then there's also things like drought or water deprivation. And remember, we had a very dry period in September, and this can stress the plants out a little bit. And in some cases, that can mean that they start that fall senescence process a little quicker or a little earlier. There are other environmental stresses like nutrient deficiency, which might mean that they can't hang on to their leaves as long. And then there could be things like pathogens, microbial pathogens or insect pests that might stress the plant on an individual plant-by-plant basis over the summer, which might cause them to start sooner in their fall senescence process because they're feeling that stress. So they're integrating a lot of these different factors, and this can vary both species to species, but also in a microhabitat, one plant that's growing in your garden versus one that's growing down the street may be experiencing slightly different conditions, and this may influence how quickly they start fall senescence. But also there could be genetic differences. So different genotypes may have earlier senescence or may have brighter colors just because of the genetic makeup of that plant.
So I'm really now understanding what you mean when this is a really complicated process.
Yeah, so their plants are integrating all of these different factors that they're experiencing. So, for example, on my way here, I was looking at some of the trees on the Oak Leaf Trail, and you can see, a one tree that's sort of starting to become gold, and the one right next to it is still very green. And so they are probably experiencing and integrating things in slightly different ways. But also on the tips of the trees that are kind of closer to the sky, I guess, they may be experiencing slightly colder conditions overnight, whereas lower down in the canopy there may be a little bit more buffering of that. And so around the tips of the trees, you might start to see the color changes earlier than right at the base of the tree because of that micro environment those leaves are experiencing.
Yeah, so now I'm getting that there aren't really ideal conditions to see all the trees at its peak color.
Well, having said that, I mean, a good cold snap, a period of several days in which there's really cool nights, getting down below 45 degrees or so Fahrenheit, is going to really start to entrain the trees to all start to respond at the same time. So that's possibly what tends to happen further north in Wisconsin when you get a cold snap, and that will instigate that fall senescence process maybe a little bit in a more coordinated way than further south here around Milwaukee.
That makes sense. And so now I'm thinking about the red and the orange and the yellow leaves. What determines whether a leaf will be a certain color?
Right. So the chlorophyll pigment that we talked about before is green, but the other pigments that can be present in leaves that can help with light harvesting during the summer, they include a group of pigments called the carotenoids. And as the name sounds, carotenoids, they are the same pigments that makes carrots orange. So oranges and yellows. So we get those colors in things like maples and birches and tamaracks and the aspen, of course, and ginkgos. And so when you take away the chlorophyll, what is left is that beautiful gold color of the carotenoids. If we are thinking about the reds, like red oak, red maples, dogwoods, burning bush is a great one. That might be a combination of the carotenoids plus another type of pigment called anthocyanins, which have more of those red-colored pigments. And then the purples that we see in things like Norway maples, some of the dogwoods, some of the ash trees or sumacs, those have probably a greater load of those anthocyanin pigments, which are in the reds and purples. And so this isn't just one pigment, but it could be a range of different anthocyanin compounds or molecules, and some of them have slightly different chemistry, so that this leads them to have slightly different range of colors that we see.
So kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, about the different factors of when a tree's leaves start to change colors, is climate change playing a role in when or where leaves change colors during the fall?
Yeah, great question. So, as I said, that plants are integrating different signals both from the day length, and that day length is obviously not changing. 300, 3,000, 3 million years ago, the day length at this time of year was similar, but the temperature is changing. And so some plants are going to be a little bit more sensitive to temperature. Some are going to be much more strongly driven in their autumn senescence by day length. And so those that are a little bit more temperature sensitive may be waiting longer, so to speak, in fall before they start instigating that fall senescence and the color change that we see. It may actually mean that across a landscape, some trees will be driven by the day length, and so they'll start to change at the same time as they did last year or last decade, whereas some trees may be waiting longer. And so you may actually get a sort of a stretching out of the autumn senescence period that you see on a landscape level as different trees are integrating signals in slightly different ways. Already you can see around Milwaukee there are trees that are losing leaves, the trees are gold, or those red and purple colors, whereas many trees just look like they did in August. So you can see there that the variability. And I think as you go further north, that colder temperatures help to compress the time scale over which the trees are going to start autumn senescence, which is why we often tend to go further north to get the en masse beautiful fall color experience.
Right. And it seems that, like you mentioned earlier, September was a drier month. So it seems that longer summers or those longer summer temperatures could delay fall colors in Wisconsin.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing with climate change is not just climate change, but other environmental change factors that are associated with that are things like insect pests and pathogens. And climate change stress may make plants in general and trees more susceptible to those kinds of stresses. And that might also influence how quickly or when they start that fall senescence process.
So my takeaway from this conversation is that fall plant cycles are really complex.
Yes, plants are integrating lots of signals, lots of biotic and abiotic things from the environment, but things also from the living environment around them.
Well, Erica, thank you so much for speaking with me today and sharing the science behind fall leaves.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Erica Young is a professor of biological sciences at UWM. She spoke with Lake Effect's Grid Nunez last year. We'll take one more break and then find out how Chicago almost became a part of Wisconsin in the early 19th century as the Illinois Territory was fighting for statehood. That's next on Lake Effect on WUWM. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. So I want you to take a moment to think about what Wisconsin would be like today if we had Chicago as a part of our state. Outside of the whole Packers-Bears conundrum that would have presented, there's a lot of things that almost came to be in the early 19th century. As the Illinois Territory was fighting for statehood, the original state border would have been along the southern tip of Lake Michigan. This could have made Wisconsin a national powerhouse with twin big cities, and Peoria would have most likely been the capital of Illinois. However, one man managed to boost that border 50 miles north, and the rest is history. Not just changing the makeup of Illinois, but our nation. Phil Luciano wrote all about it in an article for the Peoria Journal-Star, and he joins me to share more about this intriguing story. So let's get into what could have been. So in your piece, you write that if not for the craftiness of Nathaniel Pope, Chicago would have been part of Wisconsin and Peoria could have become Illinois' biggest city. So just to start, let's talk about Nathaniel Pope. Who was he?
Well, you know, he's one of those guys that when you read about later in life, and I'm a lifelong Illinois resident, and I grew up in Chicago, and it's one of those things like, dang, how did we not learn about this guy in school? Because he's tremendously interesting. From the very little I know, he wasn't so much like what you kind of think of with Illinois backroom dealing, horse trading, weaselly politicians. He might be kind of in that category, but more on the quieter side, from the little I understand, that he was an advocate for Illinois. He was the congressional delegate. This was before Illinois was a state. So he had no power in Congress except to introduce legislation. He couldn't vote. And besides, it was a territory. It wasn't like it was, Virginia or something. But he knew in many ways he had some political power behind him because of what was going on in the federal government at the time.
Yeah, so let's get into that. What were some of the key concerns for the federal government around this time? It's before statehood, before the Civil War, but a lot of factors were in play here.
Yeah, the Northwest Territory, which there was this chunk of land, and they said, well, there might be anywhere from 3 to 5 states, and we're going to make the longitude, is that the one that goes east and west? That border is going to go on the bottom of Michigan, Lake Michigan. Okay. And so we'll have some states above it and some states below. And then Ohio and Indiana somehow jacked around with that. I don't know how they did because they got their border a little higher. But Illinois was still supposed to be, the top of Illinois was going to be perpendicular to the bottom of Lake Michigan, which would have been under Chicago. So if in fact then Wisconsin and Illinois would be states, the territory that right then was just a little hamlet, a little, just this little burg that was known as Chicago, just maybe 100 people, that was in what we thought was going to be Wisconsin. But a few things were going on. One was that that chunk of land, it was federal land, it had been highly susceptible to Indian attacks. It was thought that maybe the British might come back and try to do another War of 1812. And so there was a rush to get that big chunk of land into statehood of various states. But one of the biggest things that was coming to pass is this is before the Missouri Compromise, where you couldn't admit more slave states. And so there was this trying to balance slave versus free. And I think it was Mississippi was admitted as a slave state in 1817. And so I was like, okay, we need a free state. And there's Illinois. And there's Nathaniel Pope. And he knows that the federal government wants Illinois bad, but he's also thinking, how can I make this deal a little bit better? And that sounds like a whole lot like Illinois politicians today. He might have been the great-great-grandfather unwittingly of corruption in Illinois, but he knew he kind of had the federal government kind of over a barrel and was kind of like, you want us? Here's what we need to do. So his proposal was he pushed the border up 50 miles, which included not only Chicago, which though small was thought of, hey, this can be a really good conduit between the St. Lawrence Seaway. Then if we connect this to the Illinois River, it can go to Mississippi, and we can have our own little waterway here, a big waterway here, actually, but also included Galena, which is in northwest Illinois, which was at the time huge because of lead mining, I believe. And so it was like, 8,000 square miles or something. It was crazy chunk of land, but it was more or less, okay, we'll do it. We want Illinois, so we'll take your deal, Nathaniel Pope.
Right, and outside of not just shifting that border up about 50 miles, there was some other kind of, shall we call, sketchy things that Pope did in order to reach the requirements of the federal government to approve a statehood. What were some of the other things that happened?
He also fudged the census figures. You were supposed to have 60,000 residents in your would-be state to qualify. And this is that part, those parts of history that just are like, well, what actually happened? It's hard to tell, but it was kind of like, well, let's just move it to 40. And that was kind of by Pope, and Congress was like, okay, 40. And then it was, you didn't even reach 40. And the people you counted a lot of them twice. You counted some migrants that were just moving through the territory. This was totally bogus. Okay, well, you're okay with us. That's good. I don't know how we managed that, but it was, like I said, I think it was all a matter of the Union really wanted Illinois, and so Pope knew how to push some buttons to Illinois' favor.
So Illinois was granted statehood in 1818 with this shifted border to include Chicago and Galena. So it's a lot of like what ifs here, but what do you think are some major things that you think could have turned out a lot differently had this not happened the way Pope wanted it to?
Well, for sure, Wisconsin would have been bigger. I mean, Wisconsin was ticked. I mean, they protested this for decades. I think to like the 1840s. But, what are you going to do? I don't think there's any takebacks or givebacks on statehood, but certainly Wisconsin would have been a lot bigger. It's always hard to say, would Chicago have been as big a port, or would Milwaukee have been bigger? But I think with that waterway I described, Chicago would have been maybe not as big, but still pretty big. But you'd have these two big cities. You'd have Milwaukee and Chicago in one state. And, that would have been good for Wisconsin. For Illinois, More than likely, Peoria, where I'm talking from, would have been the big city, so to speak, or could have become the big city, kind of like Des Moines is the big city of Iowa. It would have been no Chicago. So Illinois would have been a much less influential state.
Maybe this is the center of where our rivalry comes from, not Bears versus Packers. Maybe Pope is to blame for this.
I don't know. Maybe someday we can talk to him and find out whom he roots for. I'm thinking the Bears.
Well, this was fascinating to learn about. And Phil, I want to thank you so much for sharing the story with us.
Well, thanks for having me. Always glad to talk.
The Windy City is mighty pretty, but they ain't got what we got. No siree.
Phil Luciano is a reporter for the Peoria Journal-Star. We spoke in 2022. And that's Lake Effect for today. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Joy Powers, Sam Woods, and Excrit Nunez join me in producing Lake Effect each week with help from Graham Thomas. Becky Mortensen is our executive producer. Emily Files helps edit the show. We also heard from Mayan Silver, Susan Bentz, Catherine Kokel, and Jimmy Gutierrez from the WUWM News team this week. Jason Reevy is our studio engineer. Michelle Maternowski is our digital manager. Valeria Navarro-Viegas is our digital editor. Trapper Shep wrote our theme music. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Join us again on Monday at noon to learn about Wisconsin's first state park. We'll help you plan a trip there in a new Wandering Wisconsin. Plus, we'll learn about the brand new inaugural Sheboygan Film Festival. That's on Monday, but for today, thank you so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.